Morning. This morning we have with us the Honorable Michelle Flournoy, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the Department of Defense, Lieutenant General John Paxton, Director for Operations with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Honorable Andrew Shapiro, Assistant Secretary for Political and Military Affairs with the Department of State. We welcome you and thank you for being with us. Before we begin, let me remind the members that this is open to, so today's discussion should be solely involving unclassified matters and not matters of national classification. Pakistan's continuing security challenges have serious implications for our national and homeland security, for our efforts in Afghanistan, as well as for the security in that region. In fact, there's no security relationship in the world today more important than the relationship between the United States military and the military of Pakistan. This relationship has experienced its ups and downs over years, but today, as we speak, it is solid, and it must remain so if we are to serve the interests of both nations. The relationship is founded on the fact that our national interests align in fundamental ways. It's also sustained by the personal and professional relationship between the two nations' officer corps, and not least by the mutual support we provide each other in the fight against al-Qaeda and the Taliban. This committee has authorized a large share of funding for the support we provide to Pakistan, and we're deeply interested in the logistical and operational support they in turn provide to our country. I'm pleased that the administration's strategy for Pakistan is already showing signs of success due in large part to the increase in Pakistani operations, which have been largely successful. I applaud the recent detention of senior Taliban leaders inside Pakistan, the increased cross-border collaboration between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the growing popular support for our shared counterterrorism activities. However, there's still a long way to go and frankly, a lot of hard work. Hold and build capabilities are integral to counterinsurgency operations in Pakistan, but they're not yet developed. Pakistan must have the civilian capacity needed for long-term security and stability in the country. Moreover, there's a need for greater international contributions to Pakistan. The administration's recent report to Congress on metrics for Pakistan, frankly, was a disappointment. While the administration has developed good metrics and we're assured that you're tracking them, very little of this information has actually been provided to us here in Congress. And I trust that this deficiency will be corrected very quickly. The information we're missing is important because the administration has requested significant resources from Congress and the American people to continue efforts to support the country of Pakistan. The administration's fiscal year 2011 request includes an additional $1.6 billion for the CSF and $1.2 billion for the State Department's Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capabilities Fund. In addition to examining the justifications for these amounts, the committee remains interested in determining what the future is for the CSF as we wind down Operation Iraqi Freedom. Again, we thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to your testimony. To the Undersecretary Michelle Flournoy, she has become a good friend, and you've been here a good number of times sharing your wisdom with us. We're especially pleased to have you once again. Mr. McKeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding today's hearing on Pakistan. This morning's discussion gives us an opportunity to focus on our policy toward Pakistan and the types of tools that have been critical to expanding our partnership with Pakistani security forces. I also would like to welcome our witnesses, and I look forward to your testimonies and to a candid dialogue. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take a brief moment and highlight some key issues and submit my formal statement for the record.
Without objection.
Almost 1 year ago today, this committee held a similar hearing focused on Pakistan. While much has evolved over the last 365 days, three things have remained the same. First, It remains in our national interest to defeat al-Qaeda and its extremist allies and ensure that they will have no safe havens from which to attack the American people. Second, Pakistan continues to be engaged in a tough fight against a complex insurgency. Third, Pakistan is an essential partner to the United States, both in the near and long term, and we must remain committed to building trust between our two nations. While all of these factors are important to informing our overall approach to Pakistan and how we resource that effort, I'd like to focus on the security environment in Pakistan. It's my view that the traditional peacetime framework for security assistance is inappropriate and no longer works. Despite Pakistan's increased military operations, Pakistan is a nation that is more appropriately comparable to a combat zone such as found in Afghanistan and should be treated as such. That's why I supported the administration's original request for a new authority and funding stream which resembled our train and equip efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Last year, Undersecretary Flournoy testified to this committee that the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capability Fund, or PCCF, will align authorities and funding to develop Pakistan's capability in current counterinsurgency operations with DoD's responsibility to implement the security portion of the Afghanistan-Pakistan strategy, including our own current operations. I agreed then, and I agree now. Unfortunately, the next day, Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton ignored their own strategy and decided that the PCCF authority will reside in the State Department. It remains to be seen how the State Department will manage the PCCF authority and if it has the right culture and capacity to adequately respond to the wartime needs in Pakistan. In my mind, I still question the rationale to move PCCF to state when DoD has proven its ability to execute similar programs in Iraq and Afghanistan. I also think it's fair to question if Congress will appropriate this year's money without strings attached and in a manner consistent with wartime contingencies. Mr. Chairman, I think our committee should continue to closely monitor the execution of PCCF and ensure the CENTCOM commander, through the Office of Defense Representative for Pakistan, maintains the speed and flexibility needed to take advantage of emerging and urgent opportunities with the Pakistan military. Pakistani security forces have increased their operational tempo and are improving their capacity to conduct counterinsurgency operations against insurgents networks on its side of the border. It's in both our nation's strategic interests to see this momentum continue. However, as you all know, clearing is only one phase of an effective counterinsurgency strategy. As we've learned in Iraq and Afghanistan, the hold and build phases are equally important. I would like our witnesses to comment on the recent notification to Congress to use economic support funds to provide quick impact, small-scale assistance to benefit the local population. It seems to me that such funds are critical to building upon last year's military gains. Lastly, I think Congress should also consider coalition support funds under this wartime paradigm. Let me be clear. It's our congressional prerogative to conduct oversight and scrutinize funding, including CSF or any other funds in that matter. But we must balance accountability with supporting Pakistan's ability to adapt and respond to the fluid and dynamic security situation on the ground. I hope to hear from our witnesses today why the CSF is critical to Pakistan's will and ability to conduct military operations and how we're working with the government of Pakistan to ensure that such reimbursing efforts directly support U.S. military operations in Afghanistan. Again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony and discussion. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman from California. Ms. Flournoy, Undersecretary of Defense, you're on.
Mr. Chairman and Congressman McKeon, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting this panel here today to testify on the growing U.S.-Pakistan strategic partnership. The administration's core goal in this region remains consistent: to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda and ensure elimination of al-Qaeda's safe havens in the region. Pakistan is a critical ally in these efforts, and the U.S. and Pakistan also have shared interests that extend far beyond countering violent extremism. President Obama has charged us with building an effective partnership, one that advances U.S. interests while demonstrating to Pakistan that we will remain a strong supporter of Pakistan's security and prosperity over the long term. To build such an enduring partnership, we must strike the right balance between civilian and military cooperation. On the security side, our programs are designed to strengthen Pakistan's capacity to target violent extremist groups that threaten both of our countries, the region and the world. We have reiterated our long-term commitment to Pakistan through senior-level engagement by DoD leadership. We have increased the amount and the responsiveness of our security assistance. And in Pakistan itself, the Office of Defense Representative Pakistan, ODRP, has also deepened our day-to-day relations with our Pakistani defense colleagues. The close coordination between ODRP and Pakistani security forces represents a good working model for monitoring assistance and ensuring accountability. While it's certainly too early to fully evaluate the success of our approach, we believe that our efforts to demonstrate the strong and enduring U.S. commitment to Pakistan are bearing fruit. Over the last year, the government of Pakistan has demonstrated a significantly increased commitment to combating violent extremism, organizations that use its territory. When I testified on this subject last March, violent extremists were entrenched along Pakistan's western border and expanding their influence into the settled areas of Pakistan. Devastating attacks on cities from Islamabad to Lahore led to a public outcry and a galvanizing of Pakistani political will to combat these violent extremist organizations. In the last year, Pakistani security forces have taken unprecedented military action, recapturing significant territory from insurgent groups. Their actions have disrupted al-Qaeda and its affiliates in the border regions, and their perseverance in the face of significant casualties, nearly 4,000 in 2009 alone, testify to their commitment to the fight. But even with the momentum of recent operational successes, Pakistan still faces a Herculean task. The threat of militant violence against the Pakistani state continues. The human costs of that violence and the instability that it's engendered is incalculable, and the financial strain is taking an enormous toll on Pakistan's economy. The United States faces three significant hurdles in our efforts to assist Pakistan: capacity, threat perceptions, and mistrust of the United States. When it comes to capacity, Pakistan's security forces have improved their ability to clear territory, but this progress remains fragile. Pakistan must also have the capabilities to translate tactical successes into permanent elimination of militant and terrorist safe havens. In particular, we must help Pakistan build the capacity of its civilian agencies to more rapidly move development and government resources into areas that have been cleared by the military. Another challenge relates to Pakistan's threat perceptions. Although extremist attacks have led to the repositioning of substantial Pakistani forces, Pakistan's strategic concerns about India remain preeminent. We must continue to reassure Pakistan that as it combats the terrorist threat, it is not exposing itself to increased risk along its eastern border. A final hurdle, frankly, relates to the legacy of mistrust between the United States and Pakistan. Past U.S. sanctions, Pakistani concerns about the growing U.S.-India relationship, its skepticism about U.S. staying power in the region have made it a wary partner. Similarly, reports of Pakistan's tolerance and support for some violent extremist groups have created skepticism on the U.S. side. This is a partnership that is absolutely vital to our national interests, but it is also complex, and the need for candid dialogue and mutual reassurance remains very strong, and I believe we have made substantial progress in this regard over the last year. We do believe we are on the right path. U.S.-Pakistan cooperation in the form of material assistance, training assistance, operational coordination, and reimbursement for their operational costs have been critical enablers to Pakistani progress against insurgents and has helped to build trust. The Pakistan Counterinsurgency Fund, or PCF, has proven to be particularly effective in expanding Pakistan's counterinsurgency capabilities. The flexibility of this funding has allowed DoD to take advantage of emerging opportunities to equip, train, and coordinate with Pakistani security forces. It allowed, for example, the overhaul of a dozen Mi-17 helicopters, which were used extensively in the counterinsurgency campaign in the Swat Valley. In addition, courses in intelligence analysis, civil military operations, and the law of armed conflict have helped prepare Pakistani military and frontier scouts for counterinsurgency operations. DoD has also supported enhanced coordination, both with Pakistan and across the border. And using PCF, we have helped to establish several intelligence fusion centers. Overall, this close coordination and this training relationship has proven an effective antidote to mistrust. In addition, coalition support teams, support funds, CSF, have allowed us to reimburse Pakistan for their logistical, military, and other support to our overseas contingency operations, particularly support to Afghanistan operations. And prompt payment of CSF claims while ensuring careful assessment is absolutely critical to sustaining Pakistan's willingness to continue to conduct combat operations. Finally, we strongly agree with our State Department colleagues about the importance of a multi-year security assistance package for Pakistan, one that includes substantial and predictable levels of foreign military financing. FMF is the foundation of our long-term bilateral military-to-military relationship, and such a multi-year package would further strengthen our long-term strategic partnership with Pakistan. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members, our partnership with Pakistan is fraught with challenges, but it remains vital to our overall goal of disrupting, dismantling, and defeating al-Qaeda and enhancing stability in a critical region. I want to thank you all once again for the committee's support for these endeavors and for the opportunity to testify today. We look forward to further discussion and to working closely with you in the future. Thank you.
We thank you so much. General Paxton, welcome, and we'd appreciate your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity, Congressman McCune and other distinguished members of the committee. Let me begin by thanking you for your continued support to our men and women in uniform and across the globe. I'm honored to have the opportunity to appear before the committee this morning to report on Pakistan and the vital military and security assistance we provide the armed forces in our common fight against violent extremism. I'd like to start by reiterating Undersecretary Flournoy's point that a stable and secure Pakistan is of vital strategic importance to the United States. Their fight against violent extremism is directly aligned with our goals and interests in the region. We must see Pakistan's efforts to combat violent extremism as our own, and we must remain steadfast in our commitment to developing their abilities to wage an effective counterinsurgency campaign. Thus far, our military and security assistance has indeed been instrumental in enhancing their effectiveness and success, and that of the ongoing efforts of the Pakistani security forces. As events of the past several years have made painfully clear, the Pakistani state and society are under direct threat from al-Qaeda, from Pashtun jihadi groups such as Pakistani Taliban, as well as several Sunni Deobandi and Salafi jihadi groups operating in the country. These violent networks pose danger not just to Pakistan or to South and Central Asia, but to the entire globe, including our U.S. homeland. Given this reality, it is imperative that the United States encourage and support the Pakistani government, military, and people in their fight against military extremists operating inside their own borders. Pakistan's traditional defense posture is and always has been geared to conventional military conflict with India and not a counterinsurgency. Consequently, prior to Pakistani Taliban's audacious foray into the Swat Valley approximately 1 year ago, Pakistani leadership was reluctant to acknowledge such groups as serious threats to their state security. In the past, Pakistan's approach to dealing with violent extremists relied primarily on limited and often inconclusive military operations, as well as tenuous ceasefire agreements, all of which collapsed immediately. Pakistan's approach to military networks changed when these militants began directing their violence inward against the Pakistani state, people, and the society. Over the past year, through concerted military campaigns in the federally administrated tribal areas, or FATA, and in the Northwest Frontier provinces, now the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, previously known as the NWFP, Pakistan has demonstrated increased resolve in its support of the Pakistani Taliban and other al-Qaeda-allied movements. Months of intense operations in the Fatah's Bajaur agency have greatly diminished the presence of the Pakistani Taliban and subsequently disrupted and displaced the al-Qaeda in the process as well. Late last month, military launched operations in our Oxai agency, which, while ongoing, have resulted in modest yet positive territorial gains. All of these gains highlight the Pakistani military's recent success in clearing territory formerly under the de facto militant control, which is a direct consequence of the equipping and training provided through the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Fund, or PCF, and other funding authorities such as the Coalition Support Funds, all of which have been positively enabled by this committee and Congress. The security and military assistance we provide has notably improved the efficacy of Pakistan's ongoing counterinsurgency campaign, both in the Fatah and in KPK. However, as Undersecretary Flournoy noted, simply clearing these areas of the militants is insufficient, and this progress would be undermined if the Pakistani security forces are unable to hold and gradually build in these areas. The Office of the Defense Representative of Pakistan, or ODRP, has recently noted the trickling in and the return of militants in previously cleared areas. This risk underscores the importance of providing assistance that continues to enable the Pakistanis to move permanently to dismantle extremist networks and eliminate their safe havens. Permanent control of these territories will require the development of an effective civilian governance capability, institutions, and personnel. Establishing and developing this capacity will certainly be a key challenge Pakistan will face in its efforts to hold and build within these areas. The local populace must see and believe that the government presence will be enduring and positive. However, this longer-term objective can only be achieved if the Pakistani security forces are actually capable of ensuring the civilian security in the area. Accomplishing this goal will necessitate that military and paramilitary forces are trained and equipped, not only to maintain security, but in the interim to also meet the immediate humanitarian and civilian needs of the local populations. Our continued support through PCF and CSF is helping to guarantee that all of this happens. Continued military and security assistance to Pakistan's counterinsurgency efforts will be instrumental to their success in dismantling and defeating the extremists within their country's borders. Our technical, financial, and material assistance has already enabled Pakistan to address this challenge far more aggressively than ever in the past. Deepening our ties and relationships with Pakistan will enable their government and security forces to continue pursuing objectives that are in the vital interests of both of our nations. Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you again for inviting us and for the opportunity to be with you this morning. The Undersecretary and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
General, thank you very much. Mr. Shapiro.
Chairman Skelton, Ranking Member McKeon, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on how the State Department's security assistance programs contribute to our partnership with the government of Pakistan and to security in the region. As Secretary Clinton said last month, it is clear that our partnership with Pakistan and progress on the ground are key to the security of the United States. The Secretary's visit to Pakistan last fall and the successful March 24th and March 25th U.S.-Pakistan Strategic Dialogue meeting have helped to place our partnership on a significantly stronger foundation. In this regard, I want to talk about the important role that State Department-managed security assistance programs play in Pakistan. Our security assistance efforts complement the substantial assistance being provided to Pakistan's civilian authorities and organizations consistent with the Enhanced Partnership with Pakistan Act and the President's pledge of a long-term partnership with Pakistan. The Bureau of Political Military Affairs manages assistance for Pakistan through 3 accounts: Foreign Military Financing, FMF, International Military Education and Training, IMET, and the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capability Fund, PCCF. Effective management and execution of these programs is a major priority for the Bureau. In fact, I just visited Pakistan in March to discuss in greater depth the security assistance programs that we manage there. FMF is the foundation of a long-term U.S.-Pakistan security relationship. It supports the transformation and modernization of Pakistan's military through equipment upgrades and acquisitions. In addition to developing Pakistan's long-term counterinsurgency and counterterrorism capabilities, FMF enhances the ability of Pakistan's military to meet its legitimate defense needs and play a greater role in improving regional security. The IMET program is crucial to U.S. efforts to deepen the U.S.-Pakistani partnership. IMET helps to enhance the professionalism and development of Pakistan's future military leaders. IMET is central to our efforts to allow Pakistani military officers to interact with members of the U.S. military and build personal relationships. The administration has requested $1.2 billion in FY 2011 for the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capability Fund in order to accelerate the development of Pakistan's capacity to secure its borders, deny safe haven to extremists, fight insurgents, and provide security for its population. FY 2011 will be the first year the State Department assumes full management of PCCF. We take this responsibility very seriously and are confident that we have the capability and capacity to successfully execute PCCF. Moreover, State and DoD share the goal of a seamless transition for PCCF that has no discernible impact on U.S. implementers and Pakistani forces in the field. PCCF funds will continue to build the capability of Pakistan's security forces directly engaged in combat operations to clear and hold terrain in contested areas. Supporting a better trained and equipped security force is critical to our complementary efforts to work with Pakistan's civilian government to implement our $7.5 billion 5-year civilian assistance strategy, which includes efforts to help Pakistan provide basic services in areas vulnerable to extremists. My Defense Department colleagues and I are committed to continuing to work with your committee, other DoD oversight committees, and our own State Department oversight committees, and to keep you fully informed of developments on this critical program. While PCCF will help enable Pakistan's security forces to clear and hold terrain, the security situation in the federally administered tribal areas is likely to complicate build transfer efforts for some time. Therefore, the State Department is planning to transfer $10 million in economic support funds to DoD to enable U.S. military personnel to provide rapid humanitarian and community stabilization projects to help hold conflict-affected areas. This will help fill a short-term assistance gap in areas where clearing operations are ongoing and there are acute civilian assistance needs, which civilians cannot currently access. In addition, we are working with Pakistan to find ways to afford civilians safe access to forward areas. As I mentioned, we are also making a long-term commitment of non-military assistance to Pakistan, which is targeted at helping the Pakistani people overcome the political, economic, and security challenges that threaten Pakistan's stability. With the $7.5 billion in civilian assistance authorized in the Enhanced Partnership with Pakistan Act, we are moving towards the effective balance between civilian and military assistance required to help Pakistan reach a more secure and prosperous future. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss these important programs and initiatives with you. I look forward to taking your questions.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Shapiro, you mentioned the IMED program, which is, as you know, the program that allows officers as well as others to come to our country to learn about things military, in particular the war colleges, which this committee has been very active in reviewing from time to time. There was a time when our relations with Pakistan, for all intents and purposes, were cut off, at least the military, and the IMET program suffered. And during that period of time, I think it was 8 years, I think I'm right, during that time, a whole generation of Pakistani officers did not have the opportunity to come to this country and make associates and friends. How has that affected today's operations with the Pakistan military?
I'll start off by saying clearly, as we agree that the IMET program is critically important, and that gap was unfortunate because we did miss out on the opportunity to develop those relationships with Pakistani military leaders. However, we are engaging once again. We have IMET, our IMET program we spend more on IMET with Pakistan than nearly any other country because of the importance that we place on it. We are seeing the results of that with a new generation of military officers which are able to benefit from that training.
I understand all that, but you're not answering my question. My question is, how did that gap of some 8 years affect our military relationships with Pakistan?
Clearly, there was some cost, but that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to develop a relationship that's based on a partnership going forward to demonstrate that we're there for the long haul because of that history.
Sir, if I could just add.
Yes, do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, if I could just add. What we find now is we have actually a number of senior Pakistani military officers who came through IMET before the ban, who remember their time in the United States, know their U.S. colleagues, et cetera. We have the youngest generation who's come through in recent years since we've been rebuilding the program, but in the middle, in the sort of field grade officer ranks, we really did lose a generation or lose an opportunity to build those kinds of relationships and that essential familiarity and trust. And we are now scrambling to try to find other ways to engage them and to rebuild that. But it did have quite an impact in terms of the basic relationships between the two militaries, and we will spend a long time recovering from that.
Thank you. I understand there are 2 reports on Pakistan that were due our committee yesterday. One is an interagency progress report, and the second is a Department of Defense report regarding possible alternatives to the Pakistan Coalition Support Funds. My question is, when will they be delivered?
Sir, I knew you were going to ask about that.
Do you have them with you?
I don't have them with me, but the one on CSF and alternatives just got to my office. I will sign it out first thing when I get back. And
that's number one. What about the other one?
The second one is something that, as you mentioned, it was supposed to be signed out by the president. We are seeking to have the president delegate that authority to sign for the Secretary of Defense to sign.
Is it complete?
Yes, and we're aiming, that's the issue. We just have to get the delegation of authority to sign. We aim to have those to you, certainly the first one by the end of this week, and hopefully the second one, if not early next week. So we are working very hard to get those to you.
Thank you so much. We'll look forward to receiving them. Mr. McKeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Chairman's question on IMET, apparently that gap when they weren't sending people to work with our people at that school has caused some, as you mentioned, some problems going forward, and we'll have to work to fill in that gap. So that sounds to me that you're saying IMET is very important in our mill-to-mill operations.
Absolutely. It's absolutely critical.
I'm sure that's something that we'll be addressing again as we go through the markup of our bill this year. Under Secretary Flournoy and General Paxson, during the last year, the people and leaders of Pakistan have increasingly grown to see militant and extremist groups as a serious threat to their internal security. We've also seen Pakistani security forces step up in their operations against the insurgency with increased urgency and skill. What's changed since our last hearing on Pakistan? What role has CSF and PCF played, and how do the Pakistan's efforts tie into our broader strategic goals in the region, both in the near and long term?
I think the several things have changed in the last year. The most important is the threat in Pakistan went from being one that was sort of in the border regions to one that came home to Pakistanis who live in the major cities of Pakistan, with direct attacks on Lahore, Islamabad, Peshawar, etc. And the threat came home to the Pakistani people. And I think it galvanized their political will to see this not just as Pakistan assisting the U.S. in its fight, but Pakistan having its own security challenge that they had a vital interest in dealing with. And so we have seen a huge shift in political will that has translated into a much greater level of military commitment to the fight. The op tempo is quite high. They've taken casualties and have not been deterred from continuing in the face of those casualties. The sacrifice has been quite substantial on their part. And we've also seen them, I think, another thing that's changing that's less tangible is their assessment of our commitment to them and to the region, our staying power. Because that fundamentally affects their calculus and how they're going to play the cards in their hand, if you will. And I think the fact that we've been extremely responsive with PCF and now PCCF to meet their immediate operational needs, the fact that we have followed through to reimburse them since 2001 with over $7 billion of CSF for their operational support to us, and the fact that we've engaged them in a strategic dialogue that is going beyond fighting violent extremism to addressing their more fundamental energy needs, water, strategic perspective on the region. They, I believe, are starting to believe that we are actually committed to their security and the security of the region, and that's translating into greater willingness to work with us.
Sir, I certainly support both points that Undersecretary Flournoy made. I think there's a third piece at the front end that has changed significantly in the last year, and that is the success of the allied and coalition operations in Afghanistan. I think we should never lose sight of the fact that the border is certainly porous, and the increased success of the ISAF and coalition forces, as well as the stepping up of the Afghan national security forces, has put pressure on those militant groups. And many of them have not only fled physically across the border, but have taken and tried to increase the ops tempo in their base camps, and perhaps have either gotten frustrated with the pressure or perhaps a little bit more brazen. And that was part of the assessment from the Pakistani side, that they were under threat there because it was very visible to them that the safe havens and the sanctuaries were actually originating inside their border, and they had to do something about it. And then the second follow-on piece is, I think, because of our resolve and commitment, they felt that they could take some calculated strategic risks and move forces that had been aligned and allayed against India in the conventional threat, and they realized they had to move them up into the Fatah and the Northwest Frontier provinces. So our presence, their presence, the pressure on the militant groups all served to kind of galvanize them, and then consequently some of their initial operations met with success on the ground, and then our continued resolve and staying power. I think all of those put together have given them a sense of both capacity and will, sir.
Has India pulled some of their troops from their border?
Yes, sir. I think probably on the intelligence side, we'd probably want to answer that in closed session. But there is, and we have made overtures, obviously, that trying to diminish the feeling of threat there will have mutual benefits and a lessening of tensions within the region. And I think we have good partners and allies on both sides of the India-Pakistan equation, sir.
Good. How would you assess the current security environment in Pakistan? If we had to plot it on a spectrum, would it fall under or closer to the heading of a nation at war or a nation at peace? How does the country see itself?
Sir, I think that when you talk to Pakistani interlocutors, they feel that they have a serious threat on their hands. with regard to the violent extremists. That said, I think there is a growing sense of confidence that they are dealing more and more effectively with them. The military successes that General Paxton mentioned in the tribal areas, but also our counterterrorism cooperation, particularly against Al-Qaeda in the settled areas and throughout Pakistan, has been quite successful. And we've had a number of high value arrests through our cooperation and so forth. So they definitely feel under threat, but I think they're also growing in confidence in their ability to meet that threat. And importantly, as I said, in our commitment to them to address the more fundamental and long-term conditions that would underwrite greater stability in Pakistan.
Yeah, and I would agree, sir. I don't think that the dynamic is as distinct as a nation at war or a nation at peace. It's probably closer to a nation under threat or a nation under siege, and it is probably more a nation under threat. And they realize that they have to respond now, that they have both the opportunity and the obligation, and that failure to do so now, things could conceivably get worse and get worse quickly.
What role does the ODRP play in executing the PCF program? If monies were to be delayed in the coming year, what would be the impact on the ability of ODRP in assisting the development of Pakistani counterinsurgency capabilities? What would be the impact of such delays on the ability of Pakistani security forces to conduct their own counterinsurgency operations?
With the transition from the DoD PCF authority to the State Department PCCF authority, DoD continue, and particularly ODRP and CENTCOM, continue to play a lead role in helping to define the requirements of what are the capabilities that the Pakistani military need, obviously working with the Pakistanis to do that, but also in the execution of the program on the ground. So the money comes back to a number of DoD entities, DSCA, services, et cetera, to actually execute the programs on the ground. So far so good in terms of how this is working for the year that we're in, the fiscal year that we're in. I think we don't anticipate delays. If they were to occur, we believe they'd be very consequential. This is PCF, PCCF actively supports the Pakistani military, the frontier scouts, those entities that are directly in the fight day to day. And our ability to remain responsive and steady is absolutely critical to their success on the ground.
And I would just add that we are working assiduously with DoD to ensure that there is no impact on the ground for the transfer of PCCF to the State Department. And we are putting together a team at the State Department which will manage PCCF and has already engaged closely with both the ODRP on the ground as well as CENTCOM and Joint Staff and OSD policy to ensure that there is no gap. And we are planning to invite someone from, we've already invited and planning to make a formal request to have someone from DoD join us at the State Department in the implementation of the program.
The concern I have on the delay is that I don't see a budget being passed, and I have real concerns about appropriation bills being passed this year from what we see. Would that cause a delay? Well,
you know, we still have the FY10 monies to complete spending. And obviously, you know, we need money to be able to implement the PCCF program, but we are continuing to work with DoD on the completion of the FY10 spend plan. But clearly, there would be an impact if there was a lack of funds to continue to provide to the Pakistanis.
What about a CR?
Sir, if I may, the uniqueness of the budget as it exists is the FY9 monies were one-year monies. The FY10 monies are two-year monies. So that's beneficial to us on the obligation and spend rate. It also is very timely in the transfer of responsibilities and authorities from DOD to state. And I think it also highlights, as much as the committee is able to do, the value of multi-year funding, sir.
And we would seek and ask Congress to forward fund fully PCCF ahead of the budget.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shapiro, let me pick up on that point, because you sent us a budget for 2011, which has met with a 50% cut in the rate of increase you're seeking in the Senate, in its mark of the budget resolution a week ago. And it raises the question whether or not, in the quest for complementarity as opposed to competition, in the transfer of responsibilities, the Department of State is getting its fair share of funding to undertake and support the new mission that you're undertaking. You sort of pussyfoot around that issue here in your written statement as well as in your oral statement. I think the State Department needs to state emphatically what its needs are. And one of the reasons your budget is difficult to deal with is that so much of it is not baseline spending, it's supplemental spending. The previous year money that came in supplementals that you would like to see put in the baseline, but most of it is ad hoc and non-recurring. And we need to have, I think, a new hand dealt to deal fairly with what your needs are in light of the responsibilities, the additional responsibilities you're taking on. Could you comment on that?
Well, obviously, we are supportive of the administration's budget request, disappointed by the cut, but we're hopeful that as the full Congress considers the budget, that those funds will be restored.
Look, the half the argument's in the presentation of it. And if you look at your budget base year to base year, there's a 15.6% increase. At the same time, the President's asking for a freeze in non-security funding. Very difficult for most members in both parties to sustain underwrite a 16% increase in the State Department budget at a time when non-state, non-military things are being frozen. You got to make the case.
And I think the administration has been arguing that the State Department spending is critical to our national security, that our success in Afghanistan and in Pakistan and elsewhere is critical to have the State Department funds.
My question to you is, are you taking on additional funds with the additional responsibilities as commensurate to what your needs are going to be?
We have asked for additional funds to meet these needs that we think are critically important in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, and it is a critical part of the administration's policy to fully fund civilian efforts, which I think we would all agree are going to be critical to our success.
We need an outline that shows us how your additional funding compares to your additional responsibility. I think that would help your case here.
Okay, thank you. Take that back.
I can't even see the clock, but according to the staff memo that we have, there's substantial subsidies have been paid to Pakistan and to Afghanistan, of course. For Pakistan in particular, I believe the number given us by staff was about $16 billion between 2002 and 2009, probably $20 billion between 2002 and 2010 this year. That's a substantial sum of money in a sense, but it's substantial in particular in regard to what the Pakistanis are putting up during the same period of time. They're spending about $4 billion a year, which is not a great sum of money, and it's 2.6% of their GDP. How long can we sustain these payments? Will we need to sustain these subsidies to the Pakistani Army? Is this some long-term subvention that we should be looking at and figuring into the future needs? Or is it ad hoc one time and likely to go away once we've achieved our mission?
I think that the PCF and PCCF monies are really focused on the near to midterm, and the need for those will evolve with the fight, the sort of current fight. I think some funding streams like IMET, like FMF, really need a longer-term perspective where we are building a longer-term security relationship or rebuilding a relationship with Pakistan. I think a lot of the and I'll defer to my State Department colleague on this, but a lot of the investment we're making on the civilian side is in areas like energy, infrastructure, and so forth, is actually designed to bolster the Pakistani economy so that it can generate more of its own support over time. But I think, honestly, this is a critical area of national interest, and I think we need to have a fairly long-term perspective that this is going to be an assistance priority for the United States for a number of years going forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. For each of these hearings, our professional staff prepares for us background material. And I would like to read a statement from that background material and ask you for your comments. Since 2003, the Army has conducted unprecedented counterterrorism operations in the tribal region, although such operations have frequently failed to subdue militants, alienated local residents, resulted in civilian casualties, and alleged human rights abuses, and created hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons. And then in a footnote, it says, this month, Human Rights Watch reported that it had documented as many as 300 extrajudicial killings by the Pakistani military during and after the operation in Swat Valley. Now, if what we're trying to do is to win the hearts and minds of these people in these areas, this is hardly calculated to do that. In terms of Pakistan's internal security interests and our long-term interest, isn't this treatment about as bad as the disease?
Let me just say, on the allegations of human rights abuses, we take those extremely seriously. We are engaging our counterparts in Pakistan on these allegations. We are ensuring that, for DOD's part anyway, and I'm sure the same is true for state, but that we are all ensuring that we are living by both the letter and the spirit of U.S. law in terms of making sure everybody who receives assistance goes through the Leahy vetting process, people receive human rights training, and so forth. But we are taking these allegations very seriously, and we are discussing them with our Pakistani counterparts. I would say on details of that, I would be more comfortable discussing those in a closed session with you, sir, if you want to follow up. On the IDP question, the internally displaced people, there were a large number of IDPs, or there have been. One of the things that's actually gone relatively well in this campaign is a fairly rapid resettlement of those people back to their home villages, and I think the numbers actually bear that out. That continues to be a work in progress, but a lot of assistance has gone in that direction to help the Pakistanis minimize the displacement that's resulted from the campaign.
It seems to me that in trying to solve one problem, we may be creating a different but maybe bigger problem, and I appreciate your concern. Let me read another footnote from this same report, and this is kind of unsettling to me. Pakistan's nuclear arsenal is reportedly, we don't even know who controls it apparently, is reportedly under the control of Pakistan's Strategic Plan Division, which is part of the country's nuclear command and control mechanism and led by General Khalid Kidwa. How much do we know about these people, if in fact they are the ones controlling it? And what is their disposition toward the global aspirations of Islamists who are probably right of center?
So again, in an open session, what I can say is that we believe that Pakistan has a very solid command and control system for their nuclear weapons. We have engaged with them in discussions on these issues.
But madam, if we don't even know who's controlling them, how do we know they're under good control?
I don't believe that statement is accurate, sir.
You don't believe that statement's accurate?
No.
Okay.
I believe that we have a good understanding of their command and control system, that there are clear lines of command and control, and they have made a great deal of investment in the security of their nuclear arsenal.
Do we know what their disposition is toward the global aspirations of radical Islam?
They meaning?
Those who are in control of these nuclear weapons. We know that the person who created them had no problem in dispersing this capability pretty widely. What about those who are controlling them now?
Again, I think this is the Pakistani state on both in the civilian leadership and the military leadership is dominated by people with a very secular orientation and with a very strong commitment to their responsibilities as a possessor of nuclear weapons.
I hope so.
Sir,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would say, again, this is something that if you would like to explore further, I would suggest having a closed discussion.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, Mr. Ortiz, gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Flournoy, General Paxton, Secretary Shapiro, thank you so much for joining us this morning and providing your insight into security and stability in Pakistan. You know, with our military relying on key supply routes in and out of Afghanistan and Pakistan, through Pakistan, what are we doing to ensure that these routes are secure and to allow for critical supplies to make it to our warfighter? And what is the status of the cross-border collaboration between Pakistan and Afghanistan? And what are the challenges that we still face? And I know we're using these routes, but we want to be sure that our soldiers get the supplies that they need and the weapons that they need and whatever they need. But what are we doing to be sure that as things changing and the playing field changes, what are we doing to protect those routes and to protect our soldiers and sure that they get the equipment?
Yes, sir. Your question is of vital concern, not only within the Department of Defense, but particularly to the U.S. Central Command and U.S. Transportation Command. And the contracts that we negotiate, either for access to our uniformed military or contracting out for civilian providers, are each written and enforced to adequately assess and guarantee the security of our equipment and goods as it moves on the locks or the lines of communication. In specific, and to your question, sir, I would state that I believe that the loss and pilferage rate moving through those lines of communications is only between 1% and 2%, which is actually equivalent to or perhaps just a little bit less than it is on the average elsewhere around the world. So we have a good track record for the security of equipment and gear that is getting there right now. Our concern is that they operate, obviously, different sense of time distance, different sense of importance than we do. So I think the current concern is that we have both multimodal and multiple routes so that we can build up not huge stockpiles in what we used to refer to as the Iron Mountain, but that we have an adequate flow of our equipment between what is positioned stateside or other areas in the region, what is in either Afghanistan or Pakistan, and what is on the lines of communication, just so that there's a constant movement, so that if we do have a disruption, either for security or passports and visas or whatever it is, that we have adequate to maintain the fight without putting troops at risk, sir.
When you mention about contracting out to civilians now, who are they? Are they American civilians? Are they Pakistani? Are they Afghanistanian? And do you feel comfortable with who you hire? It's a matter of trust, because we have seen that there have been several inside jobs where some of our soldiers have been killed.
Yeah, a constant source of concern, sir, but there is a vetting process. There's both an enforcement process when we write the contract, and then how we guarantee that the terms of the contract are enforced. Whether we do it ourselves or whether we work through a second or third party through the government of Pakistan, the government of Afghanistan, or an independent contractor there. And it is no different than those things that we have done in either Afghanistan or Iraq. And it's subject, we put in the terms of reference there, it's subject to our supervision and an assessment on the metrics there about how much does flow, gets there on time, gets there without being vandalized or lost.
And sir, if I could just add, since 2001, the Pakistani military has made keeping these lines open and securing the flow of goods through them a major priority. And this is one of the core functions of our Coalition Support Fund reimbursement, is to reimburse them for that critical support that they're providing to keep our supply lines to Afghanistan open.
Thank you so much. My time's about up. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Tranks, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. General, I always want to say a special thank you to those that carry stars on their uniform. That's an indication of a life lived essentially for the sake of freedom and others, and I appreciate your service. I guess I want to start by taking up to some extent where Congressman Bartlett left off. I'll try to stay away from any areas that would even approach a classified nature, but I know, as you are very concerned, as well as all of us, that weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons falling into terrorist hands, are among our greatest fears or greatest concerns. And my question revolves around who is in charge of Pakistan's military and foreign policy. There's some debate of whether that's Islamabad or the military. In a Washington Post op-ed on Tuesday, Ahmed Rashid wrote that Pakistan's military has virtually been taken out of control of foreign policy, and strategic decision-making has been taken from the civilian government. And I guess that question seems critical to me, given the fact that even General Musharraf, in coming into power some years ago, was essentially came into power under with some fairly radical backing, and even though he did a lot to work with us, a lot of that mechanism still remains in the military, and of course the concern would be that someone in control of nuclear capability might be compromised. And so I guess my overall question is it possible to discern a trend on the issue as to whether the military or Islamabad is controlling foreign policy in that regard? And then I'll direct the question to you, General, and then also to Undersecretary Flournoy.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Pakistan, since the elections, is working through the civilian control of the military, and I wouldn't say certainly a fledgling democracy, but a democracy that had been out of practice for some years when Musharraf cemented the power there. But I think based on both civilian to civilian and military to military relationships, there is a respect for the obligations and the responsibilities on both sides of the aisle, whether it is a uniform or a suit. And I think General Kayani is mindful of the obligation to control the nuclear stockpile and where they may be, but also responsive to where President Zardari and Prime Minister Jalani may go as the government continues to manifest itself.
And you share Secretary Flournoy's general conclusion that those nuclear weapons in Pakistan's arsenal are at least secure within civilian hands or civilian government control?
I'm sorry, sir. Yeah, and again, without going into closed session here, I mean, we are working under the expectation and from our contacts that they have an adequate internal, even though we might not have perfect visibility, they have an adequate internal assessment of what they have and where it is, sir.
Yes, sir. Secretary Flournoy.
I would certainly recognize and acknowledge that Pakistan's military has been a very strong institution historically and remains a strong institution today. That said, it is also an institution that it desires and accepts civilian control and wants civilian leadership. One of the things that was very striking as we held our strategic dialogue with Pakistan just a month or two ago was the strength of the civilian ministers who came to the table and played a leading role in that dialogue, from the foreign minister to the finance minister to others in the cabinet. And they were fully engaged with their civilian counterparts on our side. And so I think that it's definitely, as if you ask for a trend, we are moving in the right direction.
Moving in the right direction. Well, thank you. Let me ask one last question, General Paxton. as far as your professional views on the strategic importance of the tribal districts along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, I know that there's a great effort to clear these areas, but is Afghanistan even winnable, or Pakistan, can it be made safe from terrorist attacks if we cannot clear these areas? What's your perspective?
Yes, sir. I mean, obviously, we're using the same counterinsurgency model that met with a great deal of success in Iraq, but is the shape, the clear, the hold, the build, and then ultimately the transfer. And we have to be always mindful that you will not go in and clear an area unless you have every intention of holding it. And then when you hold it, then you want to build it and transfer it. And you have to just make the assessment up front. Am I going to transfer it to a local tribe? Am I going to transfer it to a provincial government? Am I going to transfer it to the national government? And we have to do our mission analysis to make sure we go in with reasonable expectations about what the threat is in the area and what the ultimate end state of the area either should be or what the tribes and people in the area can support.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you.
Thank the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Taylor.
Ms. Florno, I'm curious. About 3 weeks ago, the Chief of Staff of the Pakistani Army was in town, met with a number of us. I believe his name is General Kayani. And he expressed his frustration with our State Department getting helicopters to him. And I think my question to him was, are you looking for lift? Are you looking for attack? And his answer was both. And I realize there's a lot more than just delivering a helicopter, that you have to train the pilot, that you have to put together the logistics train. But I'm curious, what is being done to address that, and what is your timeline for addressing that?
Sir, we have worked very hard on the helicopter issue. I have personally put hours and hours of my time into this. The first thing that we focused on was refurbishing their Mi-17 fleet, which was quite aged, needed a lot of spare parts, overhaul work.
Well, let's go
We've
to that
done
point.
that.
Ms. Walnut, we have,
I'm sorry?
10, well, let's go to that point. Let's start with that. We have over 10% unemployment in this country. What is the logic of refurbishing a Russian-made helicopter?
The logic,
When we make helicopters, the world's best helicopters
sir,
in this country.
They have them today. They know how to fly them. In a matter of weeks, we could get them airborne again to support them in the current fight. As a longer-term helicopter solution, we are working with the Pakistanis to look at a U.S. buy using FMF and so forth, and so that is something they may transition to. But in the near term for the current fight, we had to get what they had up and flying, and that's where we focused our initial effort.
So what is the long-term plan to get Black Hawks or something like that to them?
This is something we are in discussion with them with regard to a 5-year defense plan that we are working with them to develop, and a multi-year approach to security assistance in FMF. So they haven't made a decision yet on that, but it is something we are actively discussing with them, and I think they are very open to, frankly.
Well, if my opinion is based on when the Marines, shortly after the fall of the Iron Curtain, thought they were getting a bargain on some iron ships made in the Soviet bloc and modifying them, and thought they were getting a bargain with the modifications, it ended up taking longer. We spent more money than purchasing an American-made product. I would certainly hope we would learn from our mistakes with that. And secondly, I'm not so sure that a 5-year plan does the PACs a whole lot of good. I think they need help right now, and I realize it takes a while to train a pilot, it takes a while to put together the logistics train. But I would hope that we would have something better than a 5-year plan in mind. And I would hope that you would get back to me on what that plan is.
Sir, we are happy to do that once we have the details worked out with the Pakistanis.
Lastly, General, since you touched on it, I do remain concerned. I do think that one of the vulnerabilities that we have in Afghanistan is that 21-day transit through Pakistan to get almost everything the troops need. I'm curious, has there been any sort of an uptick on attacks on, and I realize it's private contractors transiting through Pakistan, but also realize that I think well over 100 drivers have been killed so far just transiting Pakistan. What has been the trend as far as the security on those convoys? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? I realize that you've opened some routes through the former Soviet republics coming from the north. But I've got to believe that the vast majority of the things that make it to Afghanistan still flow through Pakistan. So what are the trends as far as the security?
Sir, if you don't mind, I'd certainly like to take it for the record and get you back some accurate statistics. I believe that the trend has been relatively consistent. We haven't seen any major upticks, either going through the south, through Shaman, or through either the Northern Distribution Network or the Khyber area. We have had modest increases sometimes, whether it's a bridge blown out or a convoy attacked, but I don't think substantively in the recent time we've had a big increase at all, sir.
But you will get back to me on
I
that
will get back with you, sir.
within a week or so?
Yeah, absolutely, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kaufman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Shapiro, we're putting U.S. tax dollars are flowing into Pakistan. Well, and I guess this is Secretary Flurno too, to support the military buildup there, particularly counterinsurgency capability of the Pakistani military. Yet the Pakistani military still seems to be very focused in terms of its capability against India. And it's building up its conventional capability and maintaining its conventional capability, and not necessarily diverting enough resources of its own for a counterinsurgency fight. What are the initiatives of this administration in terms of diffusing the tensions between India and Pakistan so that they can reorient their military to what is their greatest threat, and that is Islamic fundamentalism within their own country?
Well, obviously, we're very supportive of efforts by India and Pakistan to reduce tensions. There was a recent meeting between the two governments and we want to continue to encourage those types of efforts. On our security assistance, as we mentioned, we have been focusing a lot of resources through PCF and PCCF towards the counterinsurgency fight, so our resources are being used to help them in the counterinsurgency fight that they have. And then our FMF is designed to build a fight.
Well, let me step back. But what I want to know is there a significant initiative by this administration? Obviously, there is one in the Israeli-Palestinian question, unwelcome by the Israelis, but is there one on the India-Pakistan question in terms of there ought to be a major initiative to diffuse those tensions so that we don't have to subsidize their military, that their military simply reorients itself based on what I would see as the greatest threat, which is an internal problem. But that they have to have a resolution of the India-Pakistan problem in order to divert those resources. So what initiative, if there is one, by this administration, or is there not one?
Well, I have with me the Ambassador Holbrook's deputy, Paul Jones, who I think would be well positioned to answer sort of our regional perspective. And so with your indulgence, I can ask him to come up and address that question.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Kaufman, thank you very much. In answer to your question, Mr. Kaufman, it's certainly a very high priority for the President, for Secretary Clinton, for this administration to be as supportive as we can in reducing tensions between India and Pakistan. We recognize that in order to be most supportive, we have to do what both parties both countries would like in terms of support. Where we have, we encourage, engage where we can. What we have seen is an interest on both sides, and just recently, in fact, just today, there was a meeting between Prime Minister Singh and Prime Minister Gilani, in which they announced a beginning of a dialogue process at that level of foreign ministers, which had been interrupted after the Mumbai attacks. So I would say it's something we're very focused on. It's a very complex situation, and the United States, I think, it's very clear that our support is best done in a quiet fashion and just encouraging the process and offering the support to the parties that we can.
Thank you. Another question. Certainly now the Pakistan military seems to be very engaged in fighting the Pakistan Taliban. Have we seen any evidence now that they are also willing to prosecute any activities against the Afghan Taliban on their side of the border? General Paxton.
Yes, sir. We believe with a fair degree of certainty that a lot of the extremists it's a syndicated network, and they have loose ties, they have marriages of convenience, whether it's the Haqqani network, Commander Nazir, the Taliban, the TTP, so that when you see evidence of the Pakistan security forces, whether it's the PAC-MIL, the Frontier Corps, when they're stepping up to take action against insurgents and militants locally, they're focusing obviously on the near-term target, who's creating the problem or creating the risk for them, but it is an increased evidence that they're willing to take on the entire syndicated network because they know there's movement between all of them, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Dr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Secretary Flournoy, maybe you can help settle this little factual point, but in the ranking member's opening statement, he said that Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton had reversed themselves with regard to the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capabilities Fund. My recollection was that, in fact, there was pushback from the Congress, specifically the House Appropriations Committee, wanted to make that move, and that the administration leadership responded, well, here's a way to do it, but it was not their preference. In fact, that there was no reversal by Secretary Gates or Secretary Clinton. In fact, it was a response to the Congress saying, we're going to do this. What would be the best way to do it? Is that what's your recollection?
Yes, I think Secretary Gates was very supportive of the idea of migrating the authority to state, and the question was how to do that without having any negative impact on performance and effectiveness. And so we set up a transition process that we'd have sort of the first year be kind of a two-state but a pass-through directly to DOD to sort of give us time to set up the appropriate mechanisms at state, that this year it would be fully a state authority, that DOD has some, that the DOD executes per state direction and so forth. So I think that is where we are now. Is so far so good. It's working well. We have not seen any delays in terms of execution, and as Assistant Secretary Shapiro mentioned, we are working very hard to ensure state has the capacity to do proper oversight of our execution of the program.
Any comments, Secretary Shapiro?
Yes, we have been working very closely together with DOD, and indeed very grateful for Secretary Gates' support for the State Department taking the oversight role of PCCF. And we are doing everything that we can to make sure that this program is administered properly. It is directly from the Secretary, one of my top priorities, and we will not fail in the administration of the program.
Secretary Flournoy, I want to go back to the discussion about the helicopters because I didn't understand your exchange with Mr. Taylor. I mean, in your written statement, you say an urgent need for helicopters still remains, and I mean, they're at war. It's a major. I mean, there's a huge amount of territory. The Pakistani military needs to be able to move troops around quickly, probably at multiple sites simultaneously. So I will take your word that an urgent need for helicopters still remains. Would you outline for me the specific roadblocks? Where I don't understand where the roadblocks are. What's at a time of war? You said you've been working on this. They're at war. They're losing folks. You acknowledge it's urgent. Where are the specific roadblocks to them getting the helicopters that I think you all want to help them with?
There are two types of, their principal kind of workhorses are Mi-17s, which are a Russian-made system, and the Bell 412s, in both which are American-made. In both cases, we are trying to provide spare parts, support for maintenance, overhaul, et cetera, to keep what they have in the air and flying at a very high rates. In the case of the Mi-17, the parts, the helicopter is made by a company that is under sanction. So that has required us to seek a congressional, or a waiver to actually work to buy from the company, provide parts, provide support. But we've used a national security waiver to do that because we think it's so critical. On the bells, obviously that's something that we've had more ability to control directly, and I think we're moving forward in that area. But longer term, they need some replacement helicopters. They need a new breed, if you will. And so we are right now in discussion with them to understand exactly what their requirements are, what they can afford, how many they need, and so forth. And for that longer term, mid to longer term replacement program, we will be looking to use FMF to support that over the coming years.
General Paxton, would your counterpart in the Pakistani military, how would they respond to what Secretary Flournoy just said if you were the commanders on the ground today about responding to the urgent need? I mean, I'm not putting her on the spot. I think we've got some bureaucratic things, but how do they see this situation?
So everyone in the military wants more and wants faster. The constant dynamic we have is to educate them about what is your requirement, to tell us what the capability is that we're going to provide, and then how can we best sustain it. And it goes to the discussion we had earlier about the value sometimes of getting the maintenance tail in a long-term program.
Thank you. The gentleman from California.
Just a point of clarification, if I might. Mr. Snyder likes to always correct my statements. And it's just a little thing that we have, but I unfortunately was out of the room this time. I would like to ask one question of Secretary Flournoy. The original proposal that was presented to us on the PCCF was that it would come under the Department of Defense. Is that correct?
Yes, the original proposal was that, and that was before we had further interagency discussions and worked out a transition plan that we were all happy with.
And that would be that he also requested for FY 2010.
I'm sorry, so that was the transition plan that Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton ultimately recommended.
He may have had that plan somewhere to ultimately transfer, but the
request
was that it would be under Department of Defense.
Yes, correct. And
thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Whitcomb, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Paxton, Secretary Flournoy, Secretary Shapiro, thank you so much for joining us today. Had an opportunity just recently, a couple of weeks ago, to travel to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Had an opportunity to meet with General McChrystal, with President Sadari, President Karzai, and also Prime Minister Gilani. A great trip. I left there reinvigorated concerning our efforts in both countries. Still challenges left. I think there's still things out there that we have to accomplish, but I got a good sense from our men and women on the ground there that things are going in the right direction and that we're making positive strides, and also with the leaders there and their governments, that they are appreciative of our efforts there and they see the value of our efforts, so that's always an important part of that effort. When I was in Pakistan, we met with General Kiani, had a long meeting with him. Asked him specifically about where he saw the current efforts, where he saw the needs, and we were there with Admiral Lefevre, who heads our operations there with our support, and we asked him also within the same context. And both of them say that we are gaining a significant amount of momentum in the fight against the Taliban, and both of them emphasized our long-term success is going to be tied to maintaining that momentum. And we were there meeting with General Tajik Khan with the Frontier Scouts and our folks there that are training them, the new training facility, things going in the right direction. Give me your thoughts about where we are going from your standpoint in maintaining that momentum. I know we're going to build some new training facilities there, but give me your thoughts about how we maintain that momentum, and then how do we make sure that we watch that momentum extend past the Fatah in the Northwest Frontier Province?
Well, I think a key part of this is continuing to broaden and deepen the equipping and training and assisting relationship, as you noted. I think it's also, as the Pakistani military and the Frontier Scouts have success in clearing areas, that we help provide the broader Pakistani government with the resources they need to actually hold them and build governance capacity and the ability to provide basic services to the affected populations. This ESF account that Assistant Secretary Shapiro described, where $10 million is going to be provided for DoD forces to work with PacMil to execute hold build assistance, that is a start. I think one of the conversations I think the State Department will be having with its committees, we would like to have with this committee, is what additional what additional assistance can we provide in the hold build area, and what should that authority look like? And we are still conceptualizing that as an administration, trying to figure out the best vehicles to use to ensure that it's flexible, but also that it can go to the right user. In some cases, it may be the military. In other cases, it will be a civilian agency on the ground.
Okay, very good. General Paxton?
Yeah, sir, if I may, certainly agree with Secretary Flournoy and the whole of government approach and the closeness between state and defense. The other thing, as I alluded to earlier, is not to ever lose sight of the other side of the border. So there's a tripart relationship here, and just as we build enduring relationships and comfort level with Pakistan, we want to do it with Afghanistan, and then we want the two of them to do it. So our efforts on border control points and joint coordination centers and intelligence fusion cells is all good and kind of diminishes the perception of the threat there, sir.
Great, fantastic. Secretary Shapiro?
I think Paul Jones is best positioned to talk about our efforts at economic development in Hold Bill.
If I may just briefly, sir, we enthusiastically agree with the importance of the civilian side, the Pakistani civilian side, and the international, particularly U.S. effort to support that. We have an extensive civilian assistance program that's active throughout the tribal regions and the Northwest Frontier Province through USAID, through Office of Transition Initiative, where we're working very closely to provide assistance. The World Bank has just set up a trust fund where a number of other countries can put assistance in. It's got $110 million into it so far just for those border regions in a way that builds confidence. What we've identified, as Undersecretary Flournoy was mentioning, that are in some areas where specific locations where there's been recent clearing operations and there isn't an ability for Pakistani or international assistance efforts on the civilian side to be present there. What we've thought is that the most appropriate use of a portion of the ESF funds is to, as we've outlined in testimony, to provide that for those who can have access in that area. And so I think that's a creative approach unique to this situation that we're very pleased, and I think it speaks to the civ-mil coordination we have in Pakistan.
Fantastic. One final comment. I want to emphatically support the need for helicopters there in Pakistan. Having ridden on some 40-year-old Hueys and almost not getting on board, I emphatically support whatever we can do to get some new air platforms there for them.
Sir, we hear you. We've all shared those experiences. I would just make one other point, and that is, in some cases, we may be competing with our own U.S. needs for helicopters in terms of getting in line for production. So that's a challenge.
Ms. Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of you for being here. I appreciate it. Could you put in simple terms this balance that you're talking about of military and non-military assistance? Are we thinking in terms of percentages? What is it now, and where do you want to take that in about 3 years from now? I'm trying to get a better handle on what that is, and perhaps with you've given a number of examples and you've spoken to that, but I'm not sure whether there's a clear understanding of whether you're all on the same page on that.
I actually think within the administration there is a very strong shared sense of where we're trying to go. We've gone from a situation where the bulk of our aid was on the military side. Now, for FY11, if you look at our proposals, it's close to 50-50. We've made a substantial commitment on the civilian side, and I'm happy to let Paul speak to this directly, but we're really trying to fully invest in building capacity on the civilian side of government, which we think is critical to underwriting long-term security and stability. Do you want to add on what we're doing on the civilian side?
Yeah, if I may, we've increased dramatically to $1.5 billion a year in civilian assistance on a 5-year commitment, which I think, in our view, very much mirrors the intention of a 5-year military commitment as well on the FMF side. We've dramatically changed the way we provide civilian assistance in Pakistan. We had been doing a lot, not in coordination with the government of Pakistan, and what we're doing now is going through and seeing how closely we can align our assistance and also work through accountable ministries of the Pakistan government and provincial administrations in order to get the assistance through build capacity of the Pakistan government to really have.
Is that trying to really reach individuals, and if you want to call them insurgents, in the FATA region? Because there is a difference of opinion about why people there are fighting or not fighting against their own government.
Yeah, no, we work very closely through the FATA Secretariat, and enabling them to provide small project assistance in communities that are vulnerable and to build communities' strength against extremism. We found that to be well received. It needs to be identified with Pakistan because for security reasons, but also to build the capacity and the image of Pakistan's own capability. So that is a really critical part of our assistance strategy.
We spoke earlier a little bit about what could be called the shadow war between India and Pakistan. At least it's been phrased in that way. I'm sure you're aware of that language. And in many ways, India is playing a role also, as well as Pakistan, to a certain extent, in building up capacity in Afghanistan, particularly. And I'm wondering, is that something that we're working on with them and together? Is that helpful? And how are we doing that? Road building, other capacities within Afghanistan, and whether or not that's seen as more tension building in the region or is seen as helping the efforts that we have, and certainly the dollars that are flowing into the region to try and help with that capacity.
Yeah, if I may, India has been a major donor in Afghanistan, and we very much support that. India has made significant civilian investments in areas of health, road building, and transportation. That has been a source of tension with Pakistan, as historically Afghanistan has been seen as a source of tension between India and Pakistan. We believe that to the extent that all donors can be as transparent as they can, and we try to encourage the UN leads in that effort in Afghanistan, and we support it in every way we can, so everyone can see exactly what is being done, and that can ensure that it's not misunderstood by some of the neighbors. It's a complex neighborhood, not only between, obviously, Pakistan and India, and it's to everyone's benefit to understand exactly what sort of civilian assistance is being provided.
Mm-hmm. And with all that, could you just characterize how that's having an impact on the insurgency in Afghanistan? Because so much of our effort has been directed, to the FATA and to changing that. And I know that that's it's not a simple equation. In fact, I think, General Paxton, you suggested that what we've learned in Iraq has some applicability to Afghanistan, and certainly there is some, but there are a number of experts that would suggest that this is a different animal, essentially. And can you, my time's up, but.
I think we are seeing, one of the goals we set for ourselves in Afghanistan was to really shift the momentum. And we are seeing the earliest signs of that. The addition of forces in Afghanistan, the focus on a much more effective approach to counterinsurgency is starting to put pressure on the Afghanistan side of the border in the south and the east in particular. At the same time, you have the PAC mill operations that are pressing from the other side of the border. At the same time, you have enhanced counterterrorism cooperation pressuring the leadership of al-Qaeda. At the same time, you have people waking up to the fact that the U.S. isn't leaving this region anytime soon. We have made a commitment, and we are going to stay involved in a very long-term sense. The nature of that involvement will change over time, but politically, economically, strategically, we are going to stay invested in this region. And I think all of that is starting to have a cumulative effect that is creating a lot of rethinking inside elements of the insurgency on both sides of the border. And that's exactly the kind of rethinking we want to stimulate ultimately.
Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Taylor asked about helicopters, and I'm familiar with the request by Pakistan about helicopters. We are at war, and I'm having a little bit difficulty in understanding the lack of urgency. Is there something that I'm missing?
Sir, there is absolutely no lack of urgency. And again, the thing we could do fastest was to get what they have flying. And we have increased many-fold their capacity just by getting what they have back in the air and consistently operating. We are now looking at the issue of replacement. But frankly, we have been focusing our energies, first things first, on getting them up and flying with what they have, and are now developing a multi-year plan that we will be bringing to you for replacement.
Would you get something?
I don't know if you want to add anything.
No. Let me
Okay.
stay.
Go ahead.
Would
sir.
you get something to us on that?
Yes.
In the very, very near future.
We will
not
detail what we're
just
doing.
what you're rebuilding, but the future helicopters for which they ask. Would you do that for us, please?
Yes.
And I would just add that we are using FMF to support procurement of 2 Bell 412 helicopter squadrons, $204 million from FY08 to FY11, and the $60 million FY10 SUP request to the Hill supports this.
I think, Mr. Shapiro, this question should be asked of you. We had some experts on Pakistan some time ago suggest that the real key to success and the greatest return on our investment is on the police and working with them. They're not tied to the territory vis-a-vis India. And is there some thought to helping them more than we are?
Well, it's a very timely question. There was the State Department's INL Bureau signed an implementation agreement with Pakistan in February 2010 that allows for training, infrastructure, and equipment for police and aviation support. And the goal is to expand the number of elite police, to recruit, vet, hire, train, and equip by July 2011, and to expand the infrastructure and training for FATA forces as well. So we are devoting resources to this, and it's clearly a priority for us as well.
Could you get us something on that in more detail? We'd certainly appreciate it.
Sure.
If there are no further questions, we certainly thank you very much for being with us.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Taylor.
Ms. Flournoy, you've been around long enough to know that we went through this with the Colombians on Plan Colombia, their request for Black Hawks. I would be, as a part of your presentation when you get back to us, would you give us how this is going to compare on the timeline for the delivery of the Black Hawks to Colombia, the training, the equipping, and how we're doing with Pakistan? I think that would be a very useful benchmark.
We'll do that, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
And we would ask you all to support the $60 million in the supplemental for helicopters for Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're certainly grateful for your being with us today and for your excellent testimony, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.